Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sonali Silva, and I'd like to start by thanking you all for joining us today for this important workshop. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment for introductions. Um, and so we are from the Student Counseling and Psychological Services, also known as CAPS. I am the Assistant Director of Training here at CAPS, and I'm also a licensed psychologist. Eli, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, absolutely. Hi, my name's Eli. I'm one of the doctoral interns in my last year of training here, and hopefully I'll get to interact or meet with some of you at some point.
So, I'm here today with Eli to talk about something that many of us are experiencing in one way or another, which is election stress. With the upcoming 2024 US presidential election, it's completely normal to feel anxious or overwhelmed. In fact, research shows that political events have a significant impact on our mental health and well being. And elections in particular tend to stir up emotions like stress, worry, and even anger. So before we dive in, we also want to clarify that today's conversation is focused on how to manage stress related to elections. And this discussion is in no way affiliated or geared towards any specific political party or agenda. Our aim is to provide tools and strategies to help you navigate the emotions and stress you may be experiencing during this time, regardless of your political views. Um, so here's what we're going to talk today and cover today. First, we'll dive into what stress is, because understanding the basics of stress will help us see how election stress fits into the bigger picture. Then we'll look at how the current political climate is impacting us emotionally and mentally. And Eli will be discussing some coping strategies for us. Then we will discuss how this is impacting people with marginalized identities, especially people from marginalized identities or groups are often disproportionately affected by political stress, and we'll discuss why that is. And finally, we'll wrap up with some practical strategies to help you cope, not just on election day, but in the days leading up to it and afterward. So, what is election stress? Before we even talk about what election stress is, I think we should start talking about what stress is in general. Stress happens when we feel that the demands being placed on us exceed our ability to cope with them. It could be work deadlines, family obligations, or in this case, political uncertainty. Stress can come from a lot of different sources, but the key thing to understand is that it's a response to feeling overwhelmed. Stressors are anything that triggers this reaction. So, whether it's something happening now or something we're worried about in the future. We also want to know that stress affects us both psychologically as well as physically. We might notice uncontrollable worries, headaches, sleep difficulties for some folks, changes in appetite, or even more behavioral reactions like crying. It's a universal experience. Everyone encounters stress in various forms, but when it comes to chronic or overwhelming stress, that's when it starts to affect our day-to-day well-being. So now let's talk about specifically about what election stress is. Election stress is a type of stress that many people experience during contentious political times, especially around election periods. It stems from the uncertainty of political outcomes, and the weight that elections carry. So in recent years, we've seen just how polarized political debates can become, and that can really take a toll on our mental health. Election stress can also show up in many ways, feeling on edge, worrying about the future, or even feeling emotionally drained. It's not just about the results of the election, but also about how lead up affects our day-to-day lives. Um, whether you're feeling exhausted from nonstop media coverage or worried about what the outcome might mean for you or your community, it's a very real emotional response or experience. We also wanted to have this conversation today because we are also seeing an overwhelming number of people who are experiencing election-related stress. According to American Psychological Association's 2024 poll, 73% of US adults report feeling anxious about the upcoming presidential election. This is a huge increase compared to previous years, and it reflects how intense this political environment has become this year, particularly. And what's causing this stress? So the APA highlights several factors, everything from assassination attempts to late-breaking candidate changes to heated debates and ongoing legal battles. On top of that, a recent poll from not a recent poll, actually a poll from earlier this year found that 65% of adults feel politically exhausted, while 55% feel angry about the state of politics. So it's clear that the current political climate has shifted in a way that it's deeply negative, and people are struggling to cope with this constant pressure. So how do you know if you're experiencing election stress? There are a few key signs to watch out for. You might find yourself constantly worrying about the election results or getting caught up in political debates that leave you feeling helpless or angry. You may also have trouble focusing or concentrating because your mind keeps probably drifting to news stories or social media updates. These are all signs that election stress is taking a toll on your mental health and well-being. So if you are feeling overwhelmed, remember that you're not alone. Many of us are feeling this way, and it's okay to acknowledge that political climate is affecting you. The important thing is to recognize that these signs, recognize the signs and take steps to manage that stress, because when it becomes overwhelming, it's always good for us to have some ways and strategies to cope with it. Okay, so one of the biggest contributors to election stress is overexposure to political news. We are constantly surrounded by media, whether it's on TV, online, or in conversations with friends and family. And while it's important to stay informed, too much exposure can make it hard to find a mental break. So intense conversations is another one, especially disagreements with family or friends about political issues can also be a major source of stress. On top of that, many people have also deep concerns about how election outcomes will affect their personal rights, social justice issues, or even their communities. So all of these factors can amplify the feeling of uncertainty and fear around elections. I think it's you next, Eli. So I think Eli is going to talk to us about coping strategies, how to cope with election stress.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we wanted to give you some tools, some guidance and strategies to deal with these things. Obviously, as Sonali said, it can be fairly overwhelming and ubiquitous. So we just wanted to give you some tips. So the first thing we're going to talk about for coping strategies is making a tracking log. And this is kind of pretty standard and basic to any time that you're trying to change your stress levels, change a behavior, etc. And so really what this tracking log entails is just taking note of how certain activities or engagements make you feel, right? So think about scrolling social media, Twitter, TikTok for half an hour. Think about having a heated political argument with a friend. Think about, watching cable news. Think about going for a walk. Really, the idea here is just to tune into yourself, right? Because what makes one person stressed might make another person feel relaxed and vice versa, right? So the key here is not that there are good activities and bad activities. It's how is this activity affecting you? And that's kind of the first step, because until you understand what is going on inside you, how the various activities and engagements are affecting you, it's hard to then choose a different path. So that's where we recommend you start. Do a tracking log, just jot down a sentence or two. Another strategy that we think would be helpful would be setting boundaries. And as we're going to talk about, this takes a number of different forms. But in particular, one boundary to set is limiting your exposure to political topics, news, etc. And so one way to do that is, creating specific time limits for news or political discussions, especially because on, phones and social media, apps, you can kind of set a limit. Like you can say, hey, I only want to be on this app for, 20 minutes a day, and then I want it to lock me out. Or I only want to be on my phone a certain number of, hours or minutes a day. And after that, I want it to lock me out. So that's actually one nice piece of technology is you can use that to your advantage. Similarly, though, setting physical and emotional boundaries with certain people who might be bringing up political topics more than you'd like, right? And again, this isn't a right or wrong. Maybe those people enjoy it. Maybe it's sort of a hobby for them. Maybe it makes them feel engaged and kind of involved in the political process. Maybe you don't feel the same way, right? And so it's not about your right and their wrong. It's about recognizing like, hey, this is a little too much for me. I want to pull back a little bit. And we'll give you some phrasing on how you might do that. All right, next slide, please. So social media usage, touched on this a little bit already, but also thinking not just about how much time you're spending, but what kind of accounts you're following, right? So here's where the awareness and the tracking comes in play again, right? So if you notice there are certain accounts that when you see posts from them, they're kind of fear-mongering, they're really fueling your anxiety, they make you feel worse whenever you see a post from them, that might be a good account to unfollow or to mute at least temporarily, during the heat of election season. Whereas if you notice certain accounts, make you feel calm, make you feel a sense of balance, grounded, etc., rooted in your community, those might be good ones to promote. And again, this is very individualized, so it's going to be person to person, kind of what works for you. And really, the overarching emphasis here is to try and use social media purposefully and not just passively. And what we mean by that is, if you find yourself sort of like, okay, I hear a ping, whether it's a text or a news update or whatever, and before I know it, I'm logging into Twitter or I'm logging into Facebook or I'm logging into TikTok or whatever it is. It's like you got there and you're like, oh my God, I don't even remember what I was doing, right? That's a good sign maybe that you're not doing it so purposefully, right? You're sort of getting dragged by these apps whose entire, profit structure is to get your eyeballs and keep your attention, right? As opposed to saying like, okay, I like to stay up to date, maybe on news, maybe on friends. I'm going to use whatever social media apps for 30 minutes before bed. Like from 10 to 10:30, that's my time to catch up on stuff, or in the morning or whatever. That's saying, okay, this is what I want. This is what makes me feel good. And I will take charge as opposed to I'm just going to kind of go wherever these apps want me to. Next slide, please. Yeah, wise conversations. So this is what I was alluding to before. It can be hard not just to talk about politics with people, but actually to talk about not wanting to talk about politics with people. And so here are some phrases that we think are good, and I'll explain kind of as we go why. So using a phrase like, hey, I think we're going to have to agree to disagree on this, saying, it seems like we have a difference of opinion, so maybe we should just leave it there. I'd like to stop because I think this conversation is getting a little too heated. And the reason that we like those in particular are number one, there's no accusations, there's no name calling, there's no kind of making it one person's fault or the other. It's just, hey, I see a difference of opinion. I'd like to leave it there. Or, hey, I'm not feeling comfortable. And we think that that tends to get a better response than to say, you never listen, or you just, are so intense about this, or like whatever it is, right? That tends to get people more activated. So again, setting a firm boundary, but being respectful and polite about it can be a good way to go. And again, emphasizing empathy and understanding when you're discussing sensitive political topics with other people. So if you are going to have these conversations, trying to come at it from a place of curiosity, a great question to ask is like, oh, that's interesting. Like, can you tell me why you feel that way? Or sort of, what's your evidence for feeling that way? I think most of us are not used to getting that question, and it can be a little bit almost catching us off guard, right? Because we're so used to someone just latching on and trying to argue with us. But it can be very disarming to just say, oh, I really, hadn't thought of it that way, or I certainly don't have the opinion. Tell me kind of what brings you to that conclusion. So again, trying to be respectful and showing that empathy as opposed to just, I'm right, you're wrong, and here's why. And then taking action, right? And so this is a tricky one. I think this can be a double-edged sword. So similarly to how we said with the logging, think about yourself and what will be best for you. So for some people, getting engaged in volunteer work or advocacy or campaigning or whatever it is can be really nice. It can give you a sense of, okay, rather than just being at the whim of voters and the election, et cetera, I'm doing something. I'm empowering myself to try and actually create positive change in the world. Now, for other people, they might say, oh my God, having even more time focused on politics and being around people even more who are constantly talking about thinking about the election, that's my worst nightmare. That's the last thing I would want, right? So again, it's just a matter of really taking a step back, reflecting and thinking, how would this affect me? Am I the type of person who, when I'm around other people who share my values, when I'm volunteering, etc., it gives me a sense of purpose? Or is that just going to be yet another place where politics is coming up in my life? And that's a decision you got to make for yourself. All right, next slide, please. And then I think it's the last one, but finally, focusing on mindfulness and self-care. And so I can just take a minute here to kind of explain the basics of mindfulness. So mindfulness is the idea of being really rooted in the present moment, being aware of what's going on, your current experience, and not getting dragged to the future or the past. Not ruminating on things that have happened, not worrying about things that might happen, like the upcoming election. It's really being grounded in the present moment. And we think this can be really helpful, first of all, for a variety of things, but in particular for election stress, because it brings you back to, again, where you are right now. So maybe you're out at, dinner with friends and you see a headline flash on the TV behind you and you start thinking, oh my God, how is the election going to go, right? And that's a really good time to just notice, okay, I saw this headline, that really activated me and made me start worrying, in a way that I wasn't before I saw it. But I'm out at dinner with these friends. I'm having a nice time. We're not actually talking about politics. I'm actually going to just let that concern float to the side. Maybe not forever, but right now I just want to be present. I want to enjoy this dinner and I want to be here with my friends as opposed to getting dragged into future worries. So that's the basic idea. And there are tons and tons of different ways to do mindfulness. There are breathing exercises, grounding techniques, meditations, etc. And if you're curious or interested, you can basically just go to Google or YouTube and say, mindfulness exercises or guided mindfulness, techniques, and the world's your oyster. There will be many to choose from. Next slide.
I recently just looked up like mindfulness guided mindfulness meditations for election stress, and there's some specifically
Oh, there
for
are specific ones.
stress too.
Cool.
Yeah. So that's amazing.
There you go. You could do
Yeah.
that, yeah, specifically if you wanted to.
Yeah. Okay. Um,
Back to
okay,
you.
so we also wanted to, just highlight how election stress is also impacting, it's not it impacts people in different ways. And we just wanted to acknowledge that, it's impacting folks from marginalized communities in very different ways. Um, so that's one thing we wanted to talk about. And so marginalized communities in particular often feel kind of a greater sense of anxiety during elections. This is because the political outcomes can directly affect their civil rights, social protections, and access to resources. So for these communities, elections can represent more than just change in political leadership. They can bring real threats to their safety, equality, and justice. Um, so, to understand why marginalized communities experience greater stress, we can look at the minority stress model. This model explains how stresses like violence, stigma, and discrimination disproportionately affect minority groups. So these stresses don't just cause emotional harm, they can also have physical health impacts. And these stresses don't just cause, um, you know, and they just don't like I said, it's not just like emotional harm, it also is physical health impacts. And especially when someone has multiple minority identities, like being a person of color or being within the LGBTQ plus community, the stress is often compounded, making it even more challenging to cope. Um, Another factor is bias, both implicit and explicit bias. Um, And biases, whether we're aware of them or not, can lead to discriminatory behaviors that further stress marginalized communities. As political tensions arise, we all know identity politics comes to the forefront, and we see more frequent instances of isms like racism, sexism, homophobia, etc. So these biases can lead to acts of harm or microaggressions, which only intensify election stress for marginalized communities. So for people within marginalized communities, election stress can often center on fears about civil rights, legal protections, and systemic inequalities. So for example, many in the LGBTQ plus community worry about the potential rollback of rights, while people of color might be concerned about racial justice issues or immigration policies. So the political environment can trigger historical trauma, especially for groups who have faced a long history of oppression. And the anxiety isn't just about the present, it's about the fear of social regression or losing hard-won protections. So what can allies do to support those in marginalized communities? So first and foremost, acknowledge and challenge your own biases. This is a lifelong process, and being gentle with yourself is key. But it's also important to stay active in recognizing and addressing bias when you see it. So don't be just a bystander. If you see or hear something harmful, step in. You can do this by directly addressing the situation, distracting the person who's involved, delegating to others for support, or just documenting what happened for accountability. Um, and then for those who are identifying as minorities, there are a few ways to cope with election stress too. So first thing is seek support from your community, whether that's through in-person groups or online spaces. Support during these times from your community can be helpful. Another thing is advocating for mental health services and resources can also help you stay grounded. And just don't forget that online communities can be a powerful source of solidarity during these stressful times. Um, yes, so as we wrap up, we also want to leave you with some helpful tips to consider as we approach election day. I think election is in like 3 weeks, I believe. So on or pre-election preparation, so planning ahead is key. Before the election, schedule time away from the media. Um, Engage in activities that bring you joy, like exercising, painting, hiking, spending time with friends and family. Um, and then on election day, it's important to limit your exposure to exit polls and election results. I remember I kept checking last election, like kept like refreshing my phone. So gotta you gotta take breaks and practice grounding techniques, like deep breathing and like Eli was saying, practicing mindfulness. And also, it's very important to be around people who you feel are supportive. So it could be friends, family, um, who are just supportive individuals. Eli, I think you wanted to talk about post-election day.
Yeah, yeah, I can take over from here. So yeah, just thinking about, whatever way the election breaks, whatever that looks like, whatever you were hoping for versus what happens, trying to focus on what's within your control, rather than dwelling on what's not. So again, once it's happened, rather than thinking about, oh, if only, certain states had gone a certain way, or maybe if only, X person had done more campaigning, right? It's all in the past. And so now focusing on like, all right, here's the reality. This is what's happening, whether I like it or not. What does that mean for me? What does that mean for my community? What do I do with that information? Again, thinking kind of forward looking. Similarly, to what Sonali was saying as well, seeking out support from helpful friends and family. I think it's worth thinking about, who are the people in my life who I know are really supportive, who are there for me no matter what. And in particular, if they're people who you've reached out to for support around elections or political issues, maybe just shooting them a text and saying like, hey, if things don't go my way on election day, I'm really going to need some extra support. Could we maybe block off an hour like that weekend or the next day or whatever? And so setting yourself up for, if you don't need that, great, then you just have a nice chat with a friend. But if you do need it, then it's already available to you. And lastly, allowing yourself to process whatever happens at your own pace, right? Just as with anything else in life, people are different. People process things differently. Some people might take a year to process it. Some people might take a day to process it. And just remembering, like, just because your cousin Jimmy said that he got over in a day doesn't mean that you have to. And just because, your cousin Jane said that it took her a year doesn't mean that you have to either, right? And so just staying within yourself in that way.
Next slide.
Yes, please. And then do we want to do this, Sonali?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, perfect. So I wanted to lead you all in a mindfulness activity. This is one of my favorite ones, just to give you a sense of kind of, I know we talked about mindfulness, but it's sort of like reading about how to ride a bike. You don't really know what it's like until you actually get on. So what I'll have everyone watching do is I'll have you close your eyes and just take a nice, slow, deep breath in through your nose, filling your chest, and then slow, deep breath out through your mouth. And again, another slow, deep breath in through your nose. And then a slow, deep breath out through your mouth. We're going to take a minute or two and just continue doing that. So keep your eyes closed and continue to take those deep breaths. Just start to notice what your breath feels like. Maybe it's a little bit cool as it goes in through your nose. Maybe it's a little bit warmer as it comes through your lips on the out breath. Whatever you're feeling, just try and pay attention to it with open curiosity. Again, you take those slow breaths in and slow breaths out. If you notice your mind wandering, other thoughts starting to pop in, it's totally normal. Just want to gently let those thoughts and distractions kind of melt away to the side, and then gently bring your mind back to the sensation of your breath as it goes in through your nose and out through your mouth. And now try and focus on where you feel your breath most. Maybe you feel it in your nose, in your throat, in your chest, your neck, your mouth. Just try and imagine you're a little speck of dust, tracing that breath, following it through your body. You take those nice, slow breaths in and slow breaths out. You can take another few seconds to keep doing that. And whenever you're ready, slowly bring yourself back and open your eyes. And so if we were in person, and when I've done other workshops in person with this, we like to go around and ask people how it was and what they're feeling. Since this is virtual, I'll just ask people to kind of reflect to themselves, like, what was that like? How do you feel now? Is that different than how you felt before? A lot of times people say they feel calm, they feel lightheaded, they feel a certain heaviness in their body. And so just noticing that, noticing, hey, is this a better feeling than I get when I'm doom scrolling for an hour at a time? Is this the same? My guess is it's probably a little bit different, whatever your experience was. So that's just one example of doing some mindful breathing. And then on the slide too, there were a couple other things we wanted to go over related to mindfulness. So this is a specific mindful exercise, and the nice thing is it's pretty short. It took probably 2-3 minutes. You can do that anytime you want. You can do that at lunch. You can do that, in between classes. You can do that in the morning or in the evening. But some other just general mindfulness tools that we think would be helpful would be really, again, noticing your thoughts. So this is a key one. Often we are having thoughts that are occurring so quickly we don't even realize they're happening. But those thoughts can really amplify anxiety and stress. They can cause us to make decisions that we later kind of regret. And so again, just starting with really noticing what's going on in my mind, what's going on in my body. Again, awareness around behaviors. So if you catch yourself, oh, every time there's a ping on my phone, I immediately unlock it and I look, or anytime there's a headline, I immediately go to read the article. That's useful information, right? Maybe that's not helping. Maybe that's amplifying the stress. Again, you can determine for yourself what that looks like. But oftentimes, I think we find that people are not fully aware of just how much they're doing. Another exercise is you can keep a log of how many times a day do I unlock my phone. And I can imagine for a lot of people in the audience, that might be a scary thought to know that number because it might be pretty high, right? But that's a good first point, right? If it's like, wow, I'm unlocking my phone 100+ times a day, that's probably not going to be very helpful in staying grounded, staying focused in the present moment, etc. And then just reminding you that yourself that for most things in life, whether it's election or otherwise, for most people, things are not life or death. And so we don't need to get an answer. We don't need to resolve things immediately. Certainly for elections, we can't resolve them immediately, right? I mean, we can't just make the election happen. We can't make the vote count go any faster. But really on a broader sense, like oftentimes we get stressed about, did I upset someone? How is this test going to go? Am I good enough, etc. And the truth is that for most of those things, the difference between, trying to get an answer now and trying to get an answer in an hour is pretty minimal, right? The main difference is like you will actually probably feel less stressed because you can take some time to reflect. you can go do something else and come back to it. So that's what we would really encourage you to do is remember like, hey, there is occasionally a thing that like really has a deadline and you really got to make a decision. But for most things in life, the difference between doing it this second and doing it an hour or a day later, the actual consequences are going to be pretty minimal. That's what I got for this.
Thank you.
I can go over some CAPS resources. So obviously we are from Student Health and Wellness. And so if you do feel like you need extra support, you want support around this or other things, it certainly doesn't have to be election related, obviously. CAPS services are available for any eligible student. It is built into your student health fee. So if you are enrolled, if you're taking classes and you have paid that student health fee, there's no charge to come and see us, which is one really nice thing. And so we all, in addition to just general short-term therapy, we also offer crisis services. And so this is if, you're kind of having a mental health emergency, you feel like you're not able to cope, you're not able to function, you're not able to kind of meet the daily needs and requirements, responsibilities that you have. You can call our office or just walk in 8 to 5 Monday through Friday. There's always someone on call. And so you can come in and say, if you really feel like this is true, hey, I feel like I'm having a crisis. I really need to talk to someone right now. And they will get you connected. And then separately or together with that, it can be helpful to work with someone on a slightly longer term basis so that, week to week or month to month, you can be making progress on the things that brought you in for that particular day. Anything to add, Sonali?
And we are we also have an outreach team here, and we also do a lot of outreach events. And most of our outreach events are all posted on our social media. We also, post a lot of like self-help tools on our social media accounts. So we are currently on Facebook, we used to be on Twitter. We're no longer on Twitter, but Facebook as well as Instagram. And we also have a YouTube page. So follow us on all these social media accounts. But before we end today, I wanted to just remind you also, we are also, on top of what we're doing today, this election stress workshop, we're also doing some other events related to election stress to support the UNLV community. And so we have planned some pop-up tabling events just in different locations on campus where we'll be sharing some resources on how to manage election stress as well as self help kits that we have. They're called 54321 self help kits. So we will be giving those out. So on October 18th, we will be at the Rose Garden from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. October 22nd, we will be near the library from 2 to 3 p.m. November 1st, we will be at the Student Recreation and Wellness Center building, which is where CAPS is located too. And we will be there from 1 to 2 p.m. As well as, like I was saying earlier, follow us on social media. We have also been doing a social media campaign where we have been posting different tips on how to manage election stress the last few weeks. So follow us on social media to, just like look into these posts and as a reminder of what we discussed today as well. But that's all we have today. Eli, did you have anything else to add?
No, that's it. Was just going to say, we hope that this was helpful. If you have further questions, or you want to get connected to a provider, reach out at that number or go ahead and walk into Student Health. But we hope this was useful.
Yes, thank you for joining us. Take care. Bye.
Bye.